just introduce myself. I've written 5 books on Pakistan. The forthcoming one is Development Challenges Confronting Pakistan. Today's work is based on a special report that I've just completed for the U.S. Institute for Peace on the title of today's panel, which is what I had given to Amina Syed, on legal reform and women's rights in Pakistan. So in a few months, you'll be able to access the entire report through the U.S. Institute for Peace's website. And I'm also professor and department head of international studies at the University of Oregon.
And lastly, we have Tahira Abdullah, who is a renowned activist and his part is practically a lawyer thanks to all of her legal work. I'd like to invite Dr. Anita Weiss to start.
Thank you. I'd like to request at this time, because I'm not used to it, if you could please put your mobiles on silent. We have little penalties in the U.S. if your mobiles go off in a venue like this. Can't enforce them here, but so thank you very much. First of all, I'm very honored that Oxford University Press has invited me to participate in this Karachi Literature Festival. I'm also the Vice President of the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, so on behalf of AIPS, we're always glad to see educational exchange taking place in any form. I'm also very, very pleased to be on a panel with 2 very close old friends, Tahira Abdullah and Fawzia Syed, who I know them both from the trenches of working on women's issues in Pakistan. I have a more formal presentation to make today, and so I feel I should sort of apologize for it. I was originally asked to prepare a half-hour presentation, which is now down to about 12 minutes. So that I wouldn't forget anything critical to say, I've written it out. So when we're talking about moving forward with the legal empowerment of women in Pakistan, while there are a variety of contextual arenas within which the empowerment of women in Pakistan can be considered, none are more critical than law. How women's legal rights are framed is fundamental to considering how best to advance women's empowerment. The legal structure resultant from Zia-ul-Haq's Islamization program placed women in decidedly unequal political positions to men, and women found themselves at a marked disadvantage in the national political arena in Pakistan. So today, I will review key features of recent legislation affecting women's rights and elaborate on ongoing challenges to develop further legislation. While what has been achieved thus far has had a qualitative impact on moving forward with the legal empowerment of women in Pakistan, there are far more arenas that must now be incorporated so as to have a substantive impact on women's lives, enable the laws passed to be implemented, and impact all classes of women in the country. Also, to bring Pakistan in conformity with the goals and ideals of CEDAW, which the state's party to, and secure an environment where women in Pakistan have access to viable choices in their lives. The very concept women's rights elicits disparate conflicting images in Pakistan. Consensus remains elusive in identifying what constitutes women's rights and which legal reforms can best secure those rights in Pakistan. While to some extent this dilemma has existed since the founding of the country, the past few years have seen these disagreements become truly destabilizing for political and social cohesiveness in Pakistan. I am positing how Pakistan is grappling with the construction of what can be termed gendered modernity, a compelling social dilemma wherein the country becomes increasingly urban with greater numbers of educated women, many of whom are no longer willing to tolerate discriminatory social practices and laws. At the same time, conservative religious groups aggressively promote seemingly irreconcilable stances on women's rights. Ensuring rights is only possible when they're supported by laws and policies that enshrine and enforce them, hence the importance of interrogating Pakistan's legal framework. It is in this domain, therefore, that I concentrate. We can One can consider that the most compelling arenas affecting women's legal rights in Pakistan today are developing and implementing legislation affecting women's general rights as citizens and family members, women's economic rights and opportunities to earn an income, ensuring women's safety as they enter public domains, and establishment of new laws to protect women from traditional practices such as swada and karokari and other practices which cause women to bear the consequences for wrongs committed by others and domestic and political violence. Certainly, implementation of laws is also compelling. And I talked about yesterday in this same room, I talked a little bit about implementation of the honor killings laws. But implementation only becomes a concern once the laws actually exist. Given existing time constraints, I won't go into the historical background on women's legal rights in Pakistan, except to note that Pakistan does not condone discrimination against women at the constitutional level, which many people are surprised to find out. Of course, Zia-ul-Haq's controversial Islamization program resulted in the restructuring of Pakistani national identity and especially placed previously unimagined limitations on women's personal and professional lives. In doing so, it fostered a unique controversy as the state never initiated a public consensus on what such a system would entail and superseded the constitutionally mandated Council of Islamic Ideology, which is tasked to do just that. The Hudud ordinances, heralded as the foundation of this new system, but essentially just a new penal code, focused on enforcing punishments for distinct kinds of crimes explicitly outlined in Sharia, but proved in practice to be discriminatory towards women. In the past decade, we've seen various responses to the legal quandary of women's rights in Pakistan, such as the establishment of the National Commission on the Status of Women and a number of new laws, beginning with the Criminal Laws Amendment Act in 2005, popularly referred to as the honor killing law, as it enhanced punishments for honor killings, presumably as a deterrence. We talked about that extensively yesterday. These were followed by the federal government's efforts to modify the Hudud laws through passage of the Protection of Women Act 2006 that placed the crimes of rape and adultery back into Pakistan's penal code. Reform of the two most controversial parts of the Hudud ordinances was the culmination of women's rights activisms that had begun shortly after Zia introduced his Islamization program in early 1979 and was finally set in motion when Pakistan became a states party to the UN CEDAW Convention in 1996 and as such pledged to review existing laws and social institutions to eliminate discrimination against women. Again, because of time constraints, I won't elaborate on what became a highly contested process of modifying the Hudud ordinances, involving various religious scholars, the Council of Islamic Ideology, weighing in that the existing ordinances did not conform, quote, with the intents of the Quran, Sunnah, and Sharia, the federal cabinet, the Jamaat-e-Islam, and others, especially activists such as the two sitting by my sides here, but also finally, the Protection of Women Act finally became law in November of 2006. A third initiative on women's rights, the Prevention of Anti-Women Practices Bill of 2006, sought to end, quote, the social, political, and religious excesses against women by banning practices such as forced marriages, marriage in exchange for vengeance, and deprivation of women's inheritance. After deliberating over it for 2 years, the National Assembly decided to cease its review of the bill in spring 2009, claiming that it was insufficient, poorly scripted, and that other legislation would instead be forthcoming, and it certainly has. As we all know, fall 2007 was a politically controversial period in Pakistan once again. Amid the cries to reinstate the Chief Justice, the previous summer, renewed concerns about Musharraf's constitutional legitimacy to contest the presidential election, and the return of both Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif in advance of the upcoming elections, new initiatives to promote women's rights were set aside. The turmoil was not yet over. Benazir Bhutto was assassinated the next month, leaving a political void and delaying the elections until February. Ongoing political crises have important ramifications for promoting laws to ensure women's rights. Many of the legal reforms of the late 2000s are clearly counter to what the majority of Islamist political groups argue is necessary to secure women's rights, which Al-Huda staff, which I met with on a number of occasions in Islamabad, they've identified to me as the right to love a daughter and a wife, the right of inheritance, and the right to learn and gain knowledge about Islam. Hence, their emphasis is on reinforcing traditional norms of propriety and female subservience over debating women's other rights within their communities. Women's rights activists were heartened when the National Assembly passed the domestic violence bill in August of 2009, but were soon dismayed that the Senate did not take up the bill for discussion in a timely manner and allowed it to expire. While supporters remain enthusiastic it will eventually pass, perhaps I hear from the grapevine, perhaps even this week, the entire process had to be initiated again, which has not yet happened publicly. But despite its limitations about the Domestic Violence Act, it's important to view the proposed act as another stepping stone on the path of judicial safeguards to ensure women's rights. Khawar Mumtaz has noted, and I quote her here, "Laws are important for setting standards and defining what is acceptable in society. Whatever fate awaits the new law will also depend on how much people turn to it for protection. But once it is in the statute books, the option of invoking it becomes available," end quote. We've seen evidence of this in Pakistan's preparation to file its CEDAW report by the state finally revising the draconian Hudud laws. While the act of being raped is no longer a crime in Pakistan, the law's modification in turn has neither prevented rapes from occurring or suddenly transformed inflexible perceptions of women as man's property. Too much to expect in such a short time, perhaps, but it has lifted the constraints on women of charging perpetrators with committing the crime of rape. A second initiative unanimously passed in the National Assembly in January 2010, the Protection Against Harassment for Women in the Workplace, makes provisions for the protection against sexual harassment of women in public space. While concerned with women, importantly, this legislation is not restricted to women. It requires all public and private organizations to establish an internal code of conduct at the workplace and complaint appeals mechanisms aimed at, quote, establishing a safe working environment free of intimidation and abuse for all employees, end quote. It includes penalties as well for management not instituting a code of conduct. They can actually be prosecuted and fined personally. The accompanying amendment to Pakistan's penal code importantly recognizes that sexual harassment occurs everywhere and at all times. Indeed, this amendment to the penal code signals a societal shift in thinking about sexual harassment because legal assurances and penalties for breaking the law now exist which can support awareness campaigns about sexual harassment and educate women that they now have the right to prosecute this kind of discrimination and persecution. Two additional recent bills, both modifying the Pakistan Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure, have pushed the legal empowerment of women in Pakistan further. Passed just in December 2011, the first finally rectifies the abandonment of the Anti-Women Practices Bill of 2009 by listing specific punishable offenses against compelling women to marry, especially, quote, in consideration of settling a civil dispute or criminal liability, end quote, including Vani and Swara, as well as depriving women from inheriting property or facilitating a woman marrying the Quran or other anti-women practices. The second bill, commonly referred to as the acid-throwing legislation, specifically cites penalties for causing harm or disfigurement by using a corrosive substance punishable by long imprisonment and fines of up to 1 million rupees. That actually might make people think a little. A final act of legislation promises to make perhaps the greatest difference of all to affect women's rights and empower them in the future, and that is the elevation of the National Commission on the Status of Women just a week ago. Importantly, the NCSW has been granted greater administrative autonomy to review laws, make recommendations, liaise with the provincial governments, and overall gain greater scope, funding, and impact on redressing violations against women regarding women's rights. There's a final arena that clamors to be mentioned here, notably the social costs of militarism and how the extensive violence and destruction that Pakistan has been experiencing is foundational to any discussion of the role legal reform may play in ensuring women's rights. It threatens to undermine state policies concerned with eliminating discrimination against women and the small gains made thus far in empowering women as well as polarizing the country. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and other groups are exerting pressure on the government of Pakistan to compromise on women's rights in return for political accommodations. A very real concern is that there are few people able and willing to champion the cause of women's rights in Pakistan today and who are in a position to pressure the federal government not to capitulate to such irredentist demands, hence the need to celebrate the recent elevation of the National Commission on the Status of Women in addition to other people who are still fighting the battle. In conclusion, it is one thing for states to pass laws to promote women's rights. The true test of commitment to rectifying inequities and injustice comes with implementation of those laws. Pakistan is navigating that first phase with mixed results. While women are no longer at risk of being charged with a crime for being raped, and efforts are underway to ensure women can travel to and be employed at workplaces without risk of major harassment, terrorists continue to attack girls' schools and seek to limit women's actions and rights in very violent ways. Women now have the right to go to a court to contest custody of children, but powerful, wealthy ex-husbands will still invariably prevail. In a surprising turn of events, the Federal Shariat Court recently declared 4 sections of the Protection of Women Act un-Islamic and therefore unconstitutional. Drafting new legislation to ensure women's economic rights and opportunities to earn an income will certainly be controversial, as the issues of women's mobility and economic self-sufficiency remain highly contested social terrains. Women's economic participation in Pakistan is among the lowest in the world for a variety of reasons. I learned firsthand many of the challenges confronting poor women in Pakistan to earn an income and to help feed their families when I conducted field research 2 decades ago for my book, published by OUP Pakistan, Walls Within Walls, which chronicled the lives of working women in the old city of Lahore. These women taught me then that many of them had to work within their homes, hiding the fact that they earned money doing piecework, because local Moris would condemn their husbands if others came to know they were living off the labor of their wives' hands. Use of social marketing to disseminate awareness of new laws is needed, both to the public and to the judiciary to enforce those laws. There's a dire need for public information campaigns informing women of their rights under all this new legislation. The subordinate judiciary judges must be made aware of the new legislation affecting women's rights in Pakistan. These legal reforms must also be a separate mandatory topic at the Federal Judicial Academy, so all new judges are aware of them. Yes, there is far more that remains to be done, such as regarding human trafficking. While Pakistan has been widely commended by human rights groups for passage of its prevention and control of human trafficking ordinances a decade ago, the state's attention has been placed primarily on workers smuggled abroad illegally for employment and on children trafficked as camel racers to the Middle East. There's been scant attention paid to the trafficking of women for prostitution. Advocates of reforming the ordinance argue that while the Women's Protection Act could be used as a legal mechanism for prosecuting traffickers, laying out clear safeguards is essential to ensure women not live in fear of being kidnapped and trafficked for either internal or external prosecution. Amending Pakistan's penal code has already made inroads as it prohibits sexual advances, but it does not include sexual trafficking, a concern in the larger arena of harassment that must be addressed. Indeed, we must find ways to bring together advocates of Pakistan's 2 somewhat contradictory political enterprises, those prioritizing global rights for women and those advocating a closer adherence to Islamic precepts, to find accommodation that will benefit not only women in the country, but bring together Pakistanis in a consensus that has eluded the nation thus far. Moving further with the legal empowerment of women in Pakistan today is indeed a necessary condition to secure a healthy, prosperous, and viable future for the country overall. Thank you.
I'll ask Tahir Abdullah now to speak.
Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. Anita had promised that she would be finished in 10 or 12 minutes, and it's been 23 minutes, so I think I'm also entitled to take 23 minutes. I'd like to start by recognizing, it was 20 past 12 to almost quarter to 1. I'd like to start by recognizing Kishwar Appa. 12 फरवरी 2012 है आज. 12 फरवरी नीलोफर, 12 फरवरी 1983, 12th of February 1983. The Women's Action Forum, लाहौर हाई कोर्ट से लेके रीगल चौक तक, जो हशर हुआ ज़ियाउल हक की आमरीत में, और जो ब्रूटल रिप्रेशन, पुरतशद्दुद हालात में जिन औरतों ने अपने हुकूक की जिद्दोजहद की. मैं सबसे पहले तो आपको अपना दुपट्टा दिखाना चाहती हूँ. मलिहा, पकड़ो मेरा दुपट्टा. जी किश्वर, आपका हुक्म की तामील की जाएगी. ये ख़वातीन महाज़ अमल का मंशूर है इस दुपट्टे के ऊपर. और मैं जहाँ किश्वर आपा को खिराज तहसीन और उनकी तमाम साथी औरतों को खिराज तहसीन पेश करती हूँ, वहाँ रह नहीं सकती कि हबीब जालिब को भी खिराज तहसीन ना पेश किया जाए. हमारे उस दौर में बहुत कम मर्द थे जो कि हमदर्द थे और हिमायती थे. हबीब जालिब साहब, जिनकी मैं दिलो जान से इज्जत और कदर करती हूँ, उन्होंने उसी जलसे में अपनी मशहूर नज़्म जो कि लिखी गई थी ख़वातीन महाज़ अमल के लिए, पढ़ के सुनाई, और फिर उसकी पादाश में उनके सर को मारा गया और उनका सर फटा और खून निकला, और वो भी हमारे साथ जेल गए. अब दहर में बेयारो मददगार नहीं हम, पहले की तरह बेकस और लाचार नहीं हम. सब जुल्म करम जोरों से तम पेश नज़र हैं, ये वहम तुम्हारा है कि बेदार नहीं हम. आता है हमें अपने मुक़द्दर को बनाना, तकदीर पे शाकिर पसे दीवार नहीं हम. तुम जुल्म करो और खुदा भी रहो अपने, साथी हैं बराबर के परिस्तार नहीं हम. क्यों दस्त निगर हो के जिए बरसरे आलम, जी अक्ल हैं जी इल्म हैं, बीमार नहीं हम. Thank you. Dr. Rita Weiss has gone through the background and the history of the laws. I want to talk about legal reforms. I don't want to focus on the laws because we all know about the laws. We are happy about some of them. We are extremely unhappy. मलिहा ज़िया यहाँ पर मॉडरेट कर रही हैं और मुझे बहुत खुशी है. ये आप लोग समझेंगे कि शायद ये मुझे मंथली कोई कमीशन देती हैं इनकी करने के लिए, लेकिन अभी इन्होंने किताब शाया की है. एक रिसर्च स्टडी की पब्लिकेशन है, ऑनर किलिंग्स इन पाकिस्तान एंड कंप्लायंस ऑफ लॉ. इट्स एन आई ओपनर. ये बताती हैं बहुत, जहाँ पे इट्स चॉक अ ब्लॉक विद फिगर्स एंड फैक्ट्स एंड रिसर्च फाइंडिंग्स and very beautifully put too, if I may be allowed to say so. एक बात मैं आपसे बस सिर्फ इस किताब के बारे में करना चाहती हूँ, फिर मैं अपने मौजू की तरफ आऊंगी. ऑनर किलिंग्स के जो डेटा है और जो आदाद व शुमार हैं, we don't get to know them. What you read in your newspapers, I'd like to dedicate today to the girl from Pannu Akil, Sakhar, who was murdered in the name of honor, which I call dishonor, yesterday, and it's in today's dawn for those of you who haven't read it yet. आज का मैं समझती हूँ इस नशिस्त को उस बच्ची के नाम कर देना चाहिए जिसके खानदान ने उसको बेगैरत तौर पर कत्ल किया. इस रिसर्च स्टडी में मलिहा ज़िया हमें बताती हैं, not even 2% of the annual total of honor killings in Pakistan are ever reported or recorded, and of those those that do go, जिनकी FIR होती है और जो कोर्ट में जाते हैं और जिनका केस चलता है, 77% are acquitted. So when we talk about the law and we talk about legal reforms, we have to go beyond the law. We have to talk about attitudes. We have to talk about the feudal mentality, the tribal mentality, जहाँ पे and of course the patriarchal mentality which underlies all of this. जहाँ पे जब 8 औरतों को जिंदा दरगोर कर दिया जाता है जाफराबाद, नसीराबाद में, और एक औरत सेनेटर में हिम्मत है to stand up on the floor of the Senate to condemn this act. And we know the names of those who did it. It was the Umrani tribe, the Sadiq Umranis and the Fateh Umranis of this world are guilty. This woman, a brave woman called Senator Yasmin Shah, stood up on the floor of the Senate. And she had the guts and the courage and the bravery. You want to switch your mobile off? But somebody's off? Okay. To condemn this incident, the deputy chairman of the Senate, who also happens to be Baloch, warns her, threatens her on the floor of the Senate, and Senate and Assembly proceedings are all recorded for posterity. Madam Senator Sahiba, आप बेहतर होगा कि खामोश हो जाएं. मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूं, this is July 2008, मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूं कि 12 गयूर बागैरत बहादुर कबायली क्वेटा से रवाना हो चुके हैं. वो इस्लामाबाद आपको कत्ल करने के लिए आ रहे हैं. वो दिन और आज का दिन, shame. वो दिन और आज का दिन, Senator Yasmin Shah has never been seen again. I cannot inform you whether she has actually been murdered by those 12 Ghayur, Bagherat, Bahadur, Lashkar from Quetta, or whether she has had to flee the country for her life. This is the environment and the milieu in which legal reforms. What legal reforms are we talking about? I'll tell you what legal reforms we are talking about. इसको कहते हैं 18वीं आईनी तरमीम, the 18th constitutional amendment, which was the centerpiece. अब मैं यहाँ पर अगर किसी का नाम लूँ, किसी हुकूमत का या किसी अफराद का या किसी एक फर्द का, बराए करम आप में से जो लोग मियाँ नवाज शरीफ को सपोर्ट करते हैं या पीपल्स पार्टी को सपोर्ट करते हैं या अल्ताफ भाई को सपोर्ट करते हैं या असफंदियार वली को सपोर्ट करते हैं या गॉड फॉरबिड चौधरी शुजात को सपोर्ट करते हैं, बराए करम जाती मत ले लीजिए, क्योंकि मैं किसी पार्टी के साथ नहीं हूं, एंड स्पेशली नॉट मैं पीटीआई के साथ नहीं हूं. लिहाजा बराए करम जो मैं बात करूंगी, कोई भी इसको जाती मत ले. Nothing personal, nothing individual, nothing against any one party. I am a Pakistani and I speak about 48% population which comprises the women of Pakistan. इसको 18वीं आईनी तरमीम कहते हैं. It is the centerpiece of the People's Party's 4-year rule and power. This is the greatest achievement that they cite when they talk about their achievements. इसके बारे में मैं आपको 2 बातें बताना चाहती हूँ 18वीं आईनी तरमीम के बारे में. सबसे पहली बात, और शायद ये आप में से कुछ लोग लेसर बात समझें, लेकिन मैं वैल्यू जजमेंट नहीं करना चाहती कि कौन सी ज्यादा अहम बात है, कौन सी कम अहम बात है. 2 बातें मैं करना चाहती हूँ. एंड प्लीज रेस्ट अश्योर्ड, टाइम कीपर साहिबा, that I am not going to go into each shick of the constitution regarding the 18वीं आईनी तरमीम. 2 बातें. हम खवातीन मुतालबा कर के थक गई. किश्वर आपा यहाँ तशरीफ फरमा हैं, मुझे बहुत खुशी है. आज की चीफ गेस्ट इस सेशन की, हम इनको जानते हैं और इनको यहाँ होना चाहिए था. 180 मिलियन की लगभग आबादी, क्योंकि सेंसस भी नहीं 10 साल के बाद करने की जरूरत होती, हमें मालूम ही नहीं कि हम हैं कितने. तो चलें फर्ज किया कि हम 180 मिलियन है अकॉर्डिंग टू द पॉपुलेशन प्रोजेक्शन एक्सपर्ट्स. We are not 52%, we are not 51%, we are not 50%, we are 48% of 180 million. हम चीख कर, रो कर, पीट कर थक गई कि एक औरत को तो खुदारा ले लो 18वीं आईनी तरमीम की लॉ रिफॉर्म कमेटी के अंदर, पार्लियामेंट के अंदर. हमने कहा आप खातून स्पीकर हैं, मैडम स्पीकर साहब, आप प्लीज एक औरत को ले लें ताकि औरतों की कोई रिप्रेजेंटेशन हो 18th कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रिफॉर्म कमेटी। कहने लगी, and this is verbatim, and there's Fawzia sitting here who might correct me if I say something wrong. Not that I intend to say anything wrong. क्योंकि देखिए, जब हालात इतने खराब हो जाते हैं और इतने खौफनाक हो जाते हैं तो फिर एग्जैजरेशन की या मुबालगा आराई की जरूरत ही नहीं पड़ती ज़ेब दास्तान के लिए। कहने लगी कि नहीं, देखिए ये तो पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज का फर्ज बनता है कि वो किसको, सॉरी आई शुड, यू डोंट अंडरस्टैंड, सॉरी I'll go back into English. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do apologize. Because I know Anita is probably better in Urdu than I am, but I hadn't realized Bangladeshi बहन बैठी हैं। She said कि नहीं, ये तो पार्टी लीडर्स का फर्ज बनता था कि औरतों को भी। जी आप विमेन पार्लियामेंट्री कॉकस की आप सरबराह हैं, आप लेटर लिखें नवाज शरीफ को और जरदारी को और असफंदियार को और फजलुर रहमान को, इवन मुनव्वर हसन को और व्हाटएवर शाह व्हाटएवर मुनव्वर साहब को और सबको, काजी हुसैन अहमद को और चौधरी शुजात को, कि एक एक औरत डालो इस कमेटी के अंदर। अच्छा चलें, ये भी जाने दें, ये भी जाने दीजिए। फिर हम लोगों ने लिख लिख कर भेजना शुरू किया। नाक को इधर से नहीं पकड़ सकते, हम इधर से भी पकड़ सकते, हमें आता है किस तरह घी को निकालना है और नाक को पकड़ना है। इफ यू डोंट माइंड माई मिक्सिंग माई मेटाफोर्स। तो हमने जनाब फिर लिख लिख कर भेजना शुरू किया। मुझे नहीं मालूम यहां कितने लोग बैठे हैं जिन्होंने लिख लिख कर इनपुट्स भेजने शुरू किए। नॉट अ सिंगल लाइन, नॉट अ सिंगल एजेंडा आइटम वॉज टेकन। Oops. अच्छा, फिर जो 18वीं आईनी तरमीम का मुसव्वदा हमारे पास आया, उसके अंदर बहुत सारी चेंजेस थी। ठीक है, हमारे इनपुट्स नहीं लिए गए, बट आफ्टर दैट फ्रॉम अप्रैल 2010 द प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑफ पाकिस्तान, द ऑनरेबल Sayyid Yusuf Raza Gilani, who will be in court tomorrow morning, I may not even make it on my flight back, so please pray for us and keep your fingers crossed that we make it back from the airport to our respective homes in Islamabad, including Kishwarapa. Jab wo Prime Minister Sahab has the gall and the audacity and the temerity and the barefaced, I don't know what to call it, पता नहीं क्या कह सकते हैं इस चीज को, कि वो अप्रैल 2010 से लेके आज तक कहते नहीं थकते कि हमारी हुकूमत ने ओरिजिनल 1973 कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को रिस्टोर कर दिया। माफ कीजिएगा, वो गंदा शख्स, वो बेगैरत शख्स जनरल ज़ियाउल हक ने जितनी आईनी तरमीम की थी, the ordinances that he passed as de facto, not de jure, President of Pakistan between 1977 and 1988 were not passed by any democratically elected or representative parliament of Pakistan. Therefore, they were just the ordinances of a military dictator. Not a single one of those was touched. Why? Because they pertain to women and religious minorities, the non-Muslim minorities of Pakistan. Not a single one. Blasphemy law, qisas and diyat, shahadat, zina, hudud ordinances, फेडरल शरीयत कोर्ट का आपने बात की थी, काउंसिल ऑफ इस्लामिक आइडियोलॉजी की। काउंसिल ऑफ इस्लामिक आइडियोलॉजी तो 1973 के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के तहत इट्स अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनली मैंडेटेड स्टैट्यूटरी बॉडी। आई हैव प्रॉब्लम्स विद इट, बट वी कैन डिस्कस दैट एट नेक्स्ट ईयर सिटिंग, अमीना प्लीज। बट फेडरल शरीयत कोर्ट इज एन इलीगल कोर्ट। आप आईनी तरमीम करने चले थे, आपने क्यों नहीं कुछ किया उसके बारे में? आप खत्म कीजिए उसको। खैबर NWFP को तो खैबर पख्तूनख्वा बना दिया, लेकिन फेडरल शरीयत कोर्ट वैसे का वैसा ही है, बिकॉज इट्स अ कंट्रोवर्शियल इश्यू, बिकॉज द मुल्लाज विल कम आउट ऑन द स्ट्रीट्स, डिफाई पाकिस्तान काउंसिल का इसी वक्त इजलास हो रहा होगा जिसमें सब फ्रॉथिंग एट द माउथ कर रहे होंगे इस वक्त। खुदा रहम करे इस बेचारे मुल्क के हाल के ऊपर। फिर आप जाते हैं, फिर आप अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा में जाते हैं और आप अपनी मुल्क की रियासत की रिपोर्ट पेश करते हैं कि हमने the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women पर दस्तखत किया और तौसीक किया. Pakistan is a state party to CEDAW. It has signed and ratified it, which means that the state is now duty bound to carry out and start implementing and operationalizing these provisions of these kinds of conventions. And how do you start doing that? You start doing that by harmonizing domestic laws with the provisions of the conventions that Pakistan has signed. Pakistan went to the Human Rights Council in Geneva after the new government, the democratically elected civilian government of Pakistan, the Pakistan People's Party, which has the most progressive secular manifesto of all the political parties, presented this report at the Human Rights Council. It is a pack of lies. It forces civil society, people like myself, to be a co-author of something called a shadow report. Shadow report वो चीज़ होती है, अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा का एक mechanism है, एक तरीक़ाकार है. It's a tool provided to civil society where if the government does not include the participation of civil society and technical experts in any field whereby it is reporting back to the United Nations on conventions that it has ratified, civil society has the opportunity and the option to write a shadow report. So in 2007, I was a co-author of Talibanization and Poor Governance, Undermining CEDAW in Pakistan, which was the second shadow report on CEDAW. In 2008, I had the honor to be asked to be a co-author to the Human Rights Council, Human Rights in Pakistan, the NGO's report as opposed to the government report. Government reports are a pack of lies each time. We are scheduled to go back in July of 2012, this year, to the Human Rights Council. And I hope and pray for your sakes as well as mine. Yes, yes. I haven't spoken for 20 minutes yet, but that's okay. That's okay. No. I'm winding up now. All I want to say is that when we talk about legal reforms, we must not ghettoize women's issues into simply laws which strengthen the National Commission on the Status of Women, or acid crimes, or sexual harassment, or zina, or issues which are specifically focusing on women. Women need to be made a part of the mainstream. Women need to be integrated. Women need to be seen as half the population and the citizens of Pakistan. And most of all, women need to be acknowledged as human beings. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Dr. Fawzia Saeed to speak.
Thank you very much. After a very fiery speech of Tahira, I am going to do a calming down act, I suppose.
Do they need to be calmed down?
Yes, I think. Okay, I am director of an organization called Mehergar, and we do a lot of legal advocacy and campaigning on women's rights issues. I will focus, Anita has very clearly described and identified the legislation that has been passed and in the context of it. Tahira has kind of highlighted the gaps, what has not happened, and I will focus more on what has happened and how it has happened, because I think that we will get insights into how we go about in future. I'm an optimistic, and I look at the glass half full or quarter full, whatever it is, so that we can learn how to change ourselves and strategize differently and form coalitions, and then if there has been some success, how to replicate that and how to actually develop our strategy. And I think women need to be, women are very smart, but we have to be smarter in terms of dealing with the kinds of challenges, the humongous challenges that we have. And the challenges are not, I don't prescribe to the typical media kind of analysis that we get these days, which is very black and white, very simplistic, very bashing kind. I always like to study, I wouldn't say my enemy, but the other side, very carefully, better than they know themselves, we need to learn a lot about the other side, how things happen, how things move, where decisions are being made, and how decisions are being made, so that then I am more capable to influence those decisions right there. And a very quick example I would say is, for example, we want allocation on women's issues or women's projects increased in the budget. It is not very wise to take to the streets, and it is not very wise to go out and protest in media, because the budgets are not even made by the parliament. They're made by clerks, okay? They're made by section officers that usually do not have a complete understanding of the priorities, and then from there onwards, people just do not have time to look at it, and some of the priorities are fixed and some of them are not, and things just keep passing on. And you can see when the parliamentary debate goes on, there are hardly any substantive comments on the budget. It comes as a package and goes through. So when the budget is being passed, and if we protest outside in the street, that doesn't really help us a lot. The budget is, sorry, the focus is not budget, I'm just using this example, is actually the first draft is made in August the year before, you know, or by November it's pretty much done, and it passes in July. So the timing, the method, etc., we need to understand the process. Similarly, now I'll come to the legal side. We need to understand where legislation is made, how it is made, who is making the decision, and I think that we did do a lot of that homework, and that is why the legislation in 2010 was a breakthrough, because after Ayub Khan's 1960s package of legislation, we have not had a completely progressive legislation passed for women. The amendments to the Hudud ordinances, I wouldn't say it is a pro-women legislation. It is just that earlier we used to be slapped and now it was a punch. Like the pain of the slap was a bit less, but it did not give us rights. And then the honor killing legislation got so diluted that it was very difficult to actually implement. So this was our breakthrough package where we did not let them touch the integrity of the two legislations that we had proposed to them. And we followed it, and we found out that most of the inputs are really made by bureaucrats then in the assembly, unless we actively lobby with the parliamentarians, we explain it to them and we say we need help in this part and this part and this part, then they, and I think a lot of the people who were opposing us also did not realize the kind of homework that we had done. And even at the very last stage in the Senate, when it got a lot of resistance, like National Assembly we got it through unanimously, and in the Senate we got a lot of resistance from the religious quarters of our parliamentarian. And in my most recent book, Working with Sharks, I have kind of given a very visual description of that day, the kinds of comments that we got, you know, these NGO walis who sleep in hotels and go out with men and a lot of things. But even in the face of that, we were able to get it through beautifully because we had done enough homework on who matters and how the process goes, and we had briefed everybody so well that the resistors themselves could not imagine that we had prepared the whole Senate so nicely. So everybody kind of was playing out as our lawyer. And I think that this 2.5 years process sensitized the parliamentarians so much that no amount of gender training could have done that. The engagement with citizens, and we went to every party, not just the government parties, every party, and we used to declare that we are citizens and we are approaching you as our representative. So giving that ownership and giving that pride to them, and they all were very, and that is now we're reaping the results, because now when we take a bill on women's issues, the major homework is already done. And now we just have to explain it to them, and they are ready to. Earlier, the domestic violence bill was caught in the Senate. There was only one mullah that got up and made one objection, and everybody got scared and they just threw the bill to the mediation committee. But now the same mullahs get up and they make their comments, very brutal comments, and the other parliamentarians get up and they fight for us. And another example I want to share with you is that the Human Rights Commission bill was proposed. It got through the National Assembly unanimously. It got stuck in the Senate. One of our religious senators got up and made 1, 2, 3, 4 objections. And everybody else agreed with it, and they kind of said more negative things, because these days it is kind of fun for everybody to bash the government, everybody's doing that. And it got deferred. And we came up with the National Commission's bill, which is very similar in nature. The same guy got up, and the same guy made exactly the same observations. And there were 20 people who got up and just smeared him on the ground. They spoke in favor of this bill with so much passion and so much ownership that no other mullah got up and made a second comment. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to be very smart. We need to do our homework. We need to do how things work, and we know now that slogan chanting and making a lot of noise helps in a certain aspect, but we need to really get inside the system. And I know that we have to change the whole parameter and the framework of the system also, but still we need to learn the system very well, and then be twice as smart, and then get I cannot give you examples of cricket, but I used to watch hockey, that was my age group. And the way you take the ball to the goal is just so quick and swift, and that is, I think, where we need to get to. I mean, that is the kind of level of tools and techniques that we need to acquire, because we have to change these times. We have to. We cannot, nobody can go the other way, we have to move forward. We cannot go backwards in time. No society goes backwards in time. And there is no way that the society, no matter which party, the society can restrict women from entering into different professions, from coming out in the public space, from joining the performing arts community. There is no way. So why make women's life hell by each woman trying to struggle from ground zero? We all do that. By the time we are 50, we have earned some credibility and some space, and our daughters they start the struggle from ground zero again. Why do that? Why not collectively create larger spaces for ourselves, reclaim space, so that the next generation has it a bit easier? And I think this legislative reform, and also I would like to share very happily that this last bill that we got through during this term of the government, I give credit to the whole of the parliament, because I think every party supported, finally, not our starting line, but where we stand today. And the last bill was the 6th bill, and I'm calling it Parliament Ka Chakka, because I think that we got 6 bills through in the last 4 years, which is something. And we women sometimes try and put down our own achievements also, and we say, law to ban gaya, implementation, ye to ho gaya, wo nahi hua. I think we should stop doing that. I think it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort on our part collectively to achieve this. So we should celebrate that, and we should say, yes, there is a lot to be done. But this, at least we should draw lessons from how we became successful and what helped us. And sometimes it is not always, life has changed, this world has changed. And I have learned that you cannot bash the person who you want changed. Because these days everybody has self-respect. And if you dialogue, if you explain in a polite manner, that goes a long way. Then जूता सर पे मार के आप उसी आदमी से डिसीजन नहीं ले सकते. And we don't have to pamper them. Absolutely. चमचा भी नहीं बनना. मगर we need to be smart enough to change the hearts and minds of our decision makers. I know कि नियत की खराबी बहुत जगह है, but still we need to be smart enough, because जूते मारने has not created any results for us. So we need to create coalitions, we need to create partnerships, And where we have to put our foot down. Where we need to, we will create big protests at national level. But then, not just that. We have to strategize, we have to do collective actions, and we have to stop putting ourselves down, and we have to think positively. Sorry, this was not a very academic presentation, but I felt like we need to rethink the context of legal reforms. ठीक है? We cannot say अच्छा नमाज तो पढ़ता नहीं, रोजा रख लिया तो क्या फायदा, रोजा तो रखता नहीं, नमाज पढ़ ली तो क्या, you know, we kind of get into this this very strange logic, and we say no. Now we say अच्छा पायलट बन गई तो क्या हो गया, गांव में तो औरत पिटती है. We should stop doing that. We should stop doing that to ourselves. You say पायलट बन गई, कमाल हो गया. So I think we need that energy to push us forward. So let's be strategic, positive, stand together in solidarity. Thank you.
Okay, if we can just have a quick round of questions. If I can just request short questions, we'll take a quick round and then everyone will answer. If we can just start from the back.
रिश्वत तो वो थोड़ा सा ग्रेविटी बढ़ जाती है, इसलिए उसको कम करने के लिए हम कह देते हैं ऊपर की कमाई. इसी तरह एक कत्ल को, उस कत्ल की सफाकी को कम करने के लिए हम उसे इज्जत के लफ्ज का जो है ना कफन पहनाते हैं, ऑनर किलिंग. तो इस पूरे वर्ड से मुझे डिसएग्रीमेंट है. किलिंग ऑफ अ वुमन इज ए वुमन. जब हम कहते हैं ऑनर किलिंग तो गोया हम उसके लिए एक सोशल अप्रूवल की तरफ इनडायरेक्टली उसको पुश करते उस वर्ड को. दूसरी बात, मैंने टीवी पे भी देखा है और मुख्तलिफ जगहों पे जहां भी खवातीन के हुकूक की बात होती है, वहां पे भी रिलीजियस जो इमेजरी है वो डोमिनेट करता है पाकिस्तानी सोसाइटी के अंदर. लेकिन हमारी जानिब से कमजोरी है, जो खवातीन के हुकूक के हवाले से बात करती हैं उनके यहाँ उस रिलीजियस इमेजरी की सब्सटेंस की कमी होती है. और एक मर्द बैठ के मजहब के हवाले से एक औरत के हुकूक की तर्जुमानी कर रहा होता है. पाकिस्तान में भी हम क्यों ना अमीना वदूद की तरह, तस्लीमा नसरीन की तरह और फातिमा मरनासी की तरह हम भी एनजीओज, सिविल सोसाइटी ग्रुप्स मिल के कुछ खवातीन को हम उस इस्लामिक डिस्कोर्स के अंदर और पर्टिकुलरली इस्लामिक लीगल डिस्कोर्स के अंदर हम उनकी मुख्तलिफ यूनिवर्सिटीज से ओरियंट सवास और दूसरी यूनिवर्सिटीज प्रोग्राम्स ऑफर करते हैं. वहां से हम खवातीन को भी इस जो है ना डिसिप्लिन में ट्रेन क्यों नहीं करते, ताकि हमें एक मुल्ला की जो है ना डिपेंडेंसी और उसकी अप्रूवल की जरूरत ना पड़े. जब हमें बात करनी हो हम खुद कुरान से और इस्लामिक रेफरेंसेस से हम बात कर सकें.
Thank you. Next question is over here. Just only one round, yeah.
I had a question which is direct. I'm just building on the point that Dr. Saeed just made, that you have to work within the system. And when we look at the issues of women in Pakistan, it's more about changing attitudes and enacting laws, because laws come into action after the crime has happened. And when it comes to changing attitudes, there's no bigger vehicle than the media. But at present, the kind of themes that the media is projecting are serving to further alienate the traditional elements of society, and the traditional element of society is the majority. So is there any effort from the part of the NGOs or other civil society groups or the women who speak for women to engage the media and to work within the system, not to alienate people and give them the impression that these women who are working for NGOs are actually threatening traditional structures by Western ideas, or however, for want of a better term? That's my question.
Thank you. Over here.
My name is Claudine Le Tourneur-Dizon. I am from France, and unfortunately, I couldn't understand your speech in Urdu, but I guessed what you said. I am also the writer of a book, Ira Mandi, which is going to be launched this afternoon on a conversation. So I have a great interest in Pakistan since many years, but especially on the women. And this is also the reason why I wrote about women of Ira Mandi. My question is, I know exactly what you said and what I guessed you were saying, that the law in Pakistan are the law, but who respect the law in the rural area, in the feudal families? I have been sometime testimony of certain scenes, you know, in those families. And how are you going to change the mentality? Because since the 1947 and now, is there really a change in the women's rights in Pakistan? And how are you going to change the mentality and the traditions deeply rooted for many centuries in certain families and tribes in Pakistan? Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. If you can just have specific questions, because we're very short of time. We have one question here, then one last question over there.
Assalamualaikum. Yeah, sure. Assalamualaikum. There are two statistics from British government reports in the last 12 months about women in Pakistan, which I just want to put in front of the panel, perhaps Dr. Fawzia and others. One is the figure of 3.6%. 3.6% of women on boards in companies in Pakistan, the highest in Asia, in emerging markets in Asia. But of course, we know that many of those are family members. So I think, what platform does that create for opportunities for women in the private sector? And the second is women parliamentarians. Adam Thompson, I think the British High Commissioner, said a few weeks ago, 80% of legislation from women parliamentarians. But what about the quality? Not the quantity, the quality of that. 80% of legislation from women, from parliamentarians in Pakistan, from women parliamentarians. My question is, what does this mean in actual practical terms? You know, is 80%, does it make a difference? Does it enable you to have more legislation or not? Is it a hindrance? And what about women on boards? What does that mean in terms of opportunities in the workplace?
All right, thank you. Unfortunately, due to lack of time, we won't be able to take any more questions. If I can just request the panelists to answer the questions one after the other. Start with Tahira Abdullah. Just short. if
Okay.
possible.
There were collective questions and then there was one specific question. I'll take the specific question first. Mentality change, Madam, comes very, very slowly. It also requires specific measures. So while we talk about, there was a question on the media and maybe we can put those two together. So yes, education. Yes, media campaigns, yes, advocacy, yes, Bidari Shaur, we call that awareness raising. All of this is wonderful, but it will take time. Specific measures we can take immediately are issues like land reform, agricultural income tax, specific poverty reduction measures geared to women. For example, the government of Pakistan has not yet signed or ratified Convention 177 of ILO, which pertains to home-based women workers, home-based workers. We have been lobbying, I personally wrote the national policy for the government of Pakistan way back in 2008, but the government of Pakistan has not approved that policy. 64% of Pakistan's female labor force is home-based workers, and if we don't sign the ILO convention, how are we going to harmonize the domestic laws, such as Convention 100 and Convention 111, which is equal wages for work of equal value, and we need domestic laws, and we need a lot of social security. So that's the kind of things we need to do immediately for mentality change. But attitudinal change, behavior change comes with a lot of work. That's a long-term project. Agriculture, income tax, and land reform, and signing ILO conventions, short-term. Poverty reduction, 3 out of every 4 poor Pakistanis are women. So the feminization of poverty has to be addressed immediately for that.
Thank you. Can we just move on to
All right.
Dr. Weiss?
Okay.
to answer?
The next was collective questions.
Hi. I think that there's been huge changes. I think it's really wrong to say there haven't been big changes in Pakistan. First of all, look at the audience here. Urbanization, education, these are huge. I've written extensively on this in a chapter in Stephen Cohen's new book on Pakistan's future that was just reviewed in this week's Economist. And I think that educated, urbanized women are not going to sit quietly anymore and just let all this injustice go on around them. And I think it's really in the hands of Pakistan's women to move forward. One thing that I did talk about is I think that there's a real need, and I talked about this yesterday when we talked about the honor killings. There's a real need to educate lawyers, administrators, judges, because they don't even know about these laws and they neglect to care about the fact that these laws have even been passed. So, and I think that the more people know about the law and the more police are informed that these laws actually have to be enforced, hopefully, again, with that little bit of optimism and with pressure from constituencies, women and supporters of human rights in Pakistan, things will move forward, hopefully.
Very quickly, I'll pick a few things. One was a question about religion. I have started asserting myself when I go to TV talk shows and I say, if you're talking about women's issues, you don't have to put a dariwala in front of me. No offense to dariwalas, but I don't think these are the opposing factions. Why put religion across me? I have told many anchors that I have tried to grow a beard, but I cannot. But please don't undermine my understanding of my religion, because only because I do not say Arabic from my halak or I do not have a beard. But I could be very capable, and I have studied Islam quite well. So we need to stop putting women and religious people across the table. Also, your point about the law doesn't necessarily come after the crime is done, because now we have crafted laws that are good for prevention. Because see, now women are, the domestic violence bill that will come also has a lot of protection elements built in, because now we are taking charge of even the content of the legislation. The sexual harassment law, 80% of the benefit we will reap from the prevention side of it. So we are changing now too. In terms of...
Again for participating.